hostages blindfolded and being led around.
You know, they're completely helpless at the mercy of this crowd of people around them pushing them out, and that was pretty scary.
The diplomats have been joined by one more, Lee Schatz, another American working at the embassy, whose escape had been engineered by the Swedes. The six are now known as the house guests. After living with the Canadians for what, by Christmas, is now well over 40 days.
The longer that we were in hiding, the more the potential was that we would be found.
Day by day, the danger for the house guests is increasing. Odds are that sooner or later the diplomats will be discovered and turned over to the authorities. It's now a race against time. In early January, Mendes goes to Los Angeles on a 4-day trip to execute the first stage of his elaborate Hollywood ruse by visiting his old friend, John Chambers. With him, $10,000 of CIA cash, hidden in a secret compartment of his briefcase.
Tony had to come out to Los Angeles to try to put this plan in motion. Goes to John Chambers' house, and they sit down.
Mendes turns to Chambers and a colleague of his, Bob Seidel, to help him build up what will look like a genuine Hollywood production from scratch.
Bob was really surprised when he shows up at John Chambers' house, and they're sitting in the breakfast nook, and then here's a CIA officer saying, "We have to rescue some Americans who are stuck on a lam in Tehran." You know, like that was not what he expected that morning.
The three work fast and quickly find the script of an unmade film called Lord of Light.
Tony says, this is exactly what we need. It kind of has a Middle Eastern feel to it. So he says, let's call it Argo. And they realize that it also has a kind of mythical connotation. Jason and the Argonauts, it's the ship that the Argonauts sailed on. And Tony says, this is perfect.
With the script problem solved, next, they need a Hollywood office.
We're just coming up here on Sunset Gower Studios. This is the lot that used to be the Columbia lot, actually. And this is where Tony and John Chambers and Bob Seidel took over an office that had just been occupied by Michael Douglas for the China Syndrome, and it was empty, so that's where they set up their fake film production.
Mendes names the production company Studio 6, after the 6 diplomats he must rescue. Chambers and Seidel agree to run it on behalf of the CIA. While in California, Mendes also turns his attention to the minutiae of the operation, collecting what the CIA call pocket litter. Pocket litter refers to all the tiny details which the authorities might check during the escape.
Tony would have had to consider every possibility. Everything from the labels on their clothing down to matchbooks that came from Ottawa are bits that would be associated either with the movie industry or with Canada. Everything had to support the central cover.
Preparations for the exfiltration do not stop here. When Mendes gets back to OTS offices, he draws on his huge team of CIA technical specialists to work on the details.
He was supported by literally hundreds of people. He had disguise specialists. He had graphics people. He had document validators, how to talk about forgery. He had individuals that could talk about clothing. What would a Canadian film crew look like?
Guests have now been in hiding not for days, but months. The endless waiting has begun to unnerve them. And by this stage, any small incident is enough to cause huge alarm.
We had one incident where a helicopter flew low, very low, over the house. It scared us. We were tense, even though we were in a safe place. It didn't take much to trigger this sort of flight response or panic, whatever you want to call it.
fear, paranoia, and frustration. Their combined effect begins to wear down the mental state of the trapped diplomats. Their worries are well-founded. Inside the US Embassy, the hostages are being mistreated, even being subjected to terrifying mock executions. Despite the pressure, the house guests do whatever they can just to get through the endless weeks in hiding. This is helped by their Canadian hosts, the Sheerdowns.
The atmosphere that was created by the Sheerdowns through the family kind of setup that we had, the social events that they did for us, I think they helped us as much as possible have a normal life.
I think John realized that in order to keep us mentally healthy, you might say, that there were certain things that they could do. One of them was the routine that we had with the formal dinner and the conversation following. Another was they would have parties for us a couple times a month. They would invite people from other embassies, such as the New Zealanders and the Danish ambassador, people who knew about us, so that we could have normal social interaction with people outside of our very limited circle.
Some of their most memorable occasions include both a Thanksgiving and a Christmas feast, enjoyed in the sumptuous setting of John Sheerdown's diplomatic house.
Due to a strange fluke, the Sheerdowns had stocked their basement with alcohol because they were next in line to host one of these embassy functions that the foreign diplomats would have. Obviously that didn't happen because of the embassy takeover. It sort of shut all that stuff down, but the house guests had this abundant supply of wine and liquor and these kinds of things, so they often threw themselves little parties and they drank. But there was also a lot of tension, and there were some tense moments when they were worried about being discovered.
I felt like we were on the Titanic, and we didn't know when we were going to hit the iceberg, but unlike the people in the real Titanic, we knew that there were icebergs out there and that it was potentially possible that any day we could run into one.
Unable to leave the house and living behind closed doors, the diplomats pass endless hours in whatever way they can. It's just a waiting game.
John Sheerdown had a big library. We did a lot of reading. I read 27 books during that time. I think Mark Lydic more than doubled that. We played Monopoly, Scrabble, Bridge. There's always the worry in the back of your mind, that we might be caught.
They became a bit stir crazy. They had to stay inside. There were times when visitors would come over to the house. They would lock themselves in their room. They would hide under the bed. They were very nervous about making an untoward sound, anything that could attract attention.
In Washington, the CIA also feel the pressure. Mendez sets a date for the exfiltration, January 25th, 1980. The risks are so great that rather than send another agent, he'll go there himself. He selects a colleague, codenamed Julia, who speaks Farsi, the language of Iran, to travel with him. The CIA are also in contact with the Canadian ambassador, Kenneth Taylor, who has been protecting the house guests since the start. Soon Mendez will meet them all face to face